It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Hoffmann, a professor of sociology here at Brigham Young University. He received a bachelor's degree in political science from James Madison University, as well as 2 master's degrees, a master's in justice from American University and a master's of public health from Emory University. Dr. Hoffmann received his PhD in criminology from the University at Albany State University of New York. He's been part of the BYU faculty for more than 2 decades and has served in a variety of leadership roles, including department chair and associate dean for research at the college. Before coming to BYU, he worked as a research scientist at the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, and he's also taught at universities in both the US and Japan. His work focuses on topics like criminology, adolescent behavior, substance use, and the role of religion in shaping people's lives. He has taught courses on applied statistics, research methods, criminology, and the sociology of religion. He has published extensively. Like if you just want to scroll through his CD, it's so much. He has published extensively and written several books, contributing important insights into how social environments influence behavior and well-being. In recognition of his impressive work, he's also been the recipient of multiple prestigious honors and awards. And despite his illustrious career, Dr. Hoffmann approaches his research teaching in life with humility, curiosity, and a willingness to learn. He is a treasured colleague and a team player. Speaking more personally, I really value John as a friend and colleague. Since I joined the faculty a few years ago, he has made me feel welcome and served as an example, personal and professional to me. He exemplifies what it means to be a disciple scholar, and our department has been very lucky to have him with us for so long. When he retires, I will deeply miss him, even as he embarks on other exciting adventures. Perhaps this will include making custom hats and shirts, a non-negligible number of which might be Lord of the Rings themed. Hopefully he'll keep us posted if he does that. Whatever he does, I have no doubt he'll be serving those around him, especially his loved ones. He is married to Lynn, of whom he speaks with the highest regard. Together they have 4 sons and 7 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hoffmann.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Is that okay? Okay, good. I appreciate that. Of course, I'm supposed to say that I don't recognize that person, but I recognize some of it. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. And thank you, Cambria, for the opening prayer. So anyway, as you heard, I'm John Hoffmann from the Sociology Department, and I will be retiring in a couple months. So you think that you students who are graduating think you're really wondering when this semester is going to end? I'm really wondering when this semester is going to end. It can't end soon enough. So anyway, let me go ahead and get started. So I just want to thank some people for just helping me out and also being great examples of disciple scholars. So for some of the content of my talk, I appreciate my son Curtis Hoffmann and what should we call Hiram? Adopted son? Foster son? Anyway, Muhammad or Hiram Hassan. And they're both excellent scriptorians, I think the word is. And they just have encyclopedic knowledge of the scriptures. And so when I had no scriptures in my original version, they helped me to put some in. So anyway, but I appreciate their help. And of course, I appreciate my colleagues from the sociology department who are here today or not here, but also those who are retired. As you can imagine, I've been here the longest of anybody on the faculty. And so I've seen a lot of people come and go. Anyway, and I just appreciate everybody I've been able to work with over the years and everybody I've gotten to get to know. And of course, the students too, who I've gotten to know over the years. It's just been a joy. Just best thing about BYU has been teaching here. The students are, as you know, and if you don't, you're too humble. The students here are second to none. So I really appreciate being able to be here for all these years and being able to contribute to the academic mission of BYU. So I want to talk about this. I'm not going to read. I love poetry, by the way, and so if you don't, I apologize. If you don't, you might get kind of sick of seeing it, but I do love poetry, and I think it represents so much that we can learn from and we can grow with. especially when you look at some of the famous Christian poets over the years. And one of the greatest was George Herbert. And he was a 17th century Anglican priest. He was a meticulous craftsman of verse, and he was a man of intense devotion. And he wrote this, as you can see, he wrote this poem called The Pulley, which it took me a few times to read it to really try to understand it. But if you read it carefully a few times, you learn that this is a poem about how God has blessed us with certain gifts, as we know. And those include the gifts of creation, strength, beauty, wisdom, pleasure, and honor. But at the last moment, after he's bestowing these gifts, he held off. And God said, I'm going to keep a gift away from my children at this point. And he said, this gift is rest or contentment. And what this is considered is kind of the final settling of our soul, the final rest of our soul, and that we can rest in his glory. But he also said, or at least Herbert in his poem said, that if God gave us everything, if he gave humanity everything, including rest or contentment, we might be so content in these gifts rather than reaching beyond them toward the giver of these gifts. So I'm going to call this the restlessness, okay? The feeling that I haven't quite arrived where I hope to arrive. And that restlessness is like a pulley that's pulling us up towards heaven. Now, looking back at my career, I think I've spent last 35 or so years in this state of restlessness, but I'm going to call it productive restlessness, okay? Rather than just the kind of restlessness we usually think about. The restlessness has been between things like data and devotion. I'm an empirical sociologist. Only Lance Erickson loves data more than I do. Well, maybe Melissa too, but I don't know. Anyway, so, as you know, in empirical sociology, we use things like instruments and different things. And I have been restless between what the instruments in our research can measure and what I knew in my heart they could not. Between the scholar I was trained to be and the disciple that I hoped to be and still hope to be someday, I had this sense of there's a sort of like I said, a productive restlessness that can occur between these two aspects of my being. Now, the restlessness is not something I want to resolve necessarily, though, okay? It really doesn't need to be resolved, or I don't even know if it could be resolved, but it's been to me anyway, as Herbert might say, the very mechanism of my reaching. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a personal story, because one of the things I think is important is for scholars to talk about how their personal stories have influenced their careers. And I think for those students out there, if you're interested, you could probably talk to any of us on the sociology faculty or any faculty at the university and find out behind their career choice, behind the focus of their research, is a story from their life. And so I'm going to tell you about this. Because it really has influenced the kind of questions I ask and the kind of things I've been interested throughout my career. So, alcohol was a presence in my family for generations before I even knew what it was. All right. If you go back in time, it moved through my family of origin, kind of like a current. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes it was destructive, but it was always shaping the emotional character of my family, the emotional environment of my family, the weather we had. And I grew up knowing what it meant to love people who, because of their alcohol use and and the way it impaired them, that I grew up loving people who just felt unreachable sometimes. And I learned at the time that these substances, whether it's alcohol or, my family's been involved in other things, lots of other things, but I learned that these don't just alter our neurological functioning. but they alter families, okay? And they reshape the transmission of love and tenderness that we receive or we wish to receive across generations. And that can be a hard thing to deal with. I know I'm teaching a class now, and it's called Drugs and Crime, but it's really kind of the sociology of crime. And even in my class of active, strong LDS people who are here, even there I can see when I talk about these things, I can see the recognition in some of their eyes about, I recognize that in my own family and how it's affected me. So I stopped drinking in my 20s. And it really wasn't a dramatic shift in my identity. It was kind of quiet, okay? It was a decision I made, and I think I had at the time. By the way, I'll talk about this later. I wasn't a member of the church when I was growing up, so I didn't come from that family. But I did make that decision with clarity, and I think with a sense of self-preservation, because I saw how it had affected my family. It's interesting now that when I try to remember like particular points when I said no more of this, or I said I'm going to try to escape that, I don't really remember those decision points very well. But I do know that I was thinking about myself and how I'm going to just preserve myself, my health, my mind, and so forth. Of course, at the time I didn't think, oh, and by the way, I'm going to make a research decision with this because, look, I've experienced this. I grew up in a neighborhood that was awash with illegal substances, alcohol, everything. I saw it firsthand among friends and neighbors and family members about the effects of these things. And I didn't really see it, but even into my 20s, I really didn't see it like, well, can I turn this into something not just personal, but vocational? And yet, that's really what I did. What I've done for the past 3.5 decades is I have focused largely on trying to understand substance use, substance abuse, disorders associated with substance use, and so forth. Tried to make sense of it, and it's still so complex. It just covers so many different disciplines that it's very difficult to get a handle on. But I tried. Okay, I mean I've been trying, but we'll see. I don't know if I'll continue to try, but anyway. So I want to read you another poem. This is by the famous Jesuit priest Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's called As Kingfishers Catch Fire. And I'm just going to read a part of it for you here, because he observed the following. You can see it up there, but anyway, each mortal thing does one thing in the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells, selves goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. All right, and the implication here is that each creature fulfills its purpose and destiny in terms of nature and its nature, okay, in terms of the nature it's living in and its nature also. And so the behaviors I was witnessing when I saw the effects of alcohol, for instance, or other substances, it really made me recognize the wounds that it causes, not just to those who are using, but to those who love those who use, including myself. And I recognized there were certain wounds that I was carrying with me because of that. But I think at the same time is that when I think back on it, I sort of used it as a map. Okay, these wounds or these experiences I had, these observations I was making, the feelings I was having about it, the sort of complicated family life that I was involved in, and so forth. It sort of became a compass for me. It sort of led me to thinking about what can I do to make a contribution to do something about this issue. Okay. What can I do, especially for those who have problems with these substances? What can I do to sort of understand them better and perhaps even try to get information out there with which they can be helped with these issues? So I tried to turn it, like I said, once again, this is such an unconscious process. It's sort of like you go through school, you think about things you want to do, you find a career, and and for academics, it's so often affected by, and I'm sure for other people too, but especially for academics, it seems to be influenced by, we sort of seem to find a map or a compass based on our early life experiences about what we want to do, what we want to focus on, and so forth. So I really wanted to focus on the family as an ecosystem. What does the family do, or what doesn't it do to affect the risks of substance use, or other sorts of things? Does it have any effect on serious substance use? Sure, if your parents drink alcohol, you're probably going to start drinking alcohol. But it doesn't mean you're going to become an alcoholic, okay? What does the family have any influence on that transition point in which somebody starts off drinking on the weekends or whatever, having a beer when they get home in the evening, to having problems with it? So I was interested in those kind of questions. And I really wanted to figure out, for instance, one of the things is, one of the best predictors of whether you're going to have a substance use problem, and this can apply to alcohol, cocaine, whatever it may be, is the earlier you start using, the more likely you're going to have a problem with it. And so I was interested in questions like that, because I wanted to really help in some way to protect young people from starting on a path that I saw too often when I was growing up, people falling on that path. So I like to see it as, in terms of, maybe Hopkins might say something like, simply doing what I was created to do, or I might even say simply doing what I was created and shaped from the clay I was into what I was supposed to do. And I look at this as perhaps, this is kind of a stretch, but I admit, but perhaps fulfilling the following scriptural mandate. For after the soul hath filled the measure of its creation, this is that purpose that I was talking about, it shall be crowned with glory, even with the presence of God the Father. Now I know there's a lot more to reaching that stage than just your vocation, but I like to think that maybe the purpose that I found may have helped me to fulfill that side of myself again. So, all right, so anyway, I have another quote for you. This is by the late writer Dennis Johnson. He's finally getting some notoriety because one of the streaming services, Netflix or something, finally turned one of his novels into a film, and so it's been on, I think, Netflix. It's called Train Dreams. But anyway, the book's much better than the movie, but the movie's pretty good too. Anyway, and he said the following. He said, now I should mention Dennis Johnson was a Vietnam vet. He had pretty serious PTSD, and he had serious addiction problems, and sort of traveled that long road from addiction to vocation, which was primarily writing about people who had experienced kind of what he had experienced in life. And even some who had it a lot who had it worse than he did. But I really like this quote, and I think it really made a profound impact on me. He said, "I was healed by everything that happened." And I thought, what a beautiful sentiment, that I could be healed by what I went through. Even the wounds that I had, I could be healed from other wounds or from other whatever it might be by what I've experienced. And to me, anyway, that's a sort of an optimistic take on the experiences we might have for the good and bad. Anyway, so once again, the healing I experienced underscored the path that my research took. And when I started looking a little bit deeper into the kinds of things I was interested in, I became interested in religion, okay, as a potential factor that affects substance use. I actually should back up a little bit. I actually started out doing sociology of religion because even though I wasn't particularly religious at the time, I sort of got depressed by all the drugs and crime research I was doing, and so I wanted something positive. And I think for most people, religion is a positive thing. So that was kind of like my yin and yang, or not yin and yang, but you know what I mean. There's kind of like the opposite things. And then I started saying, well, I should bring them together, because there is a lot of research going on about religion and behaviors, religion and attitudes, religion and behaviors, and that sort of thing. So I started looking at what the scholarship in religion said about substance use. And what I found was fairly consistently, although it's complicated, that religion does matter. And it can matter quite a bit depending on the situation. A lot of times, I'm sure you've heard, we try to adjust variables out, like, oh, we just want to take that out of there. Religion isn't, or oftentimes shouldn't be, that kind of variable. It really is a social force that we should be considering. And so things like, when I talk about religion, religiousness, things like participation in a faith community, internalization of moral schemas, embeddedness in networks of shared religious or spiritual meaning, these things function as protective factors against adolescent substance use and abuse. And the data I was looking at were fairly consistent with this and fairly compelling too. So just to give you a flavor of some of the research I did. So I did, in a study I did of marijuana use, I found that religious culture shapes behavior, not just through prohibition, not just through your parents saying, don't do this, right? But through the dynamic interplay between social networks, including peer groups, as well as moral frameworks, the kind of frameworks that you are thinking about when you're thinking about making moral decisions and so forth. And I called that a dual process model based on some other research in sociology that had used that term. With Steve Barr, who retired from this department and was just an excellent, kind colleague, he and I looked at things like, at one of the things, a couple times, in a couple of research projects, we looked at parenting style and religiosity to see, can they combine to actually alter the probability of, or affect the probability of we were looking at heavy drinking among adolescents. And we found that it did, even when you consider peer influence. And so, one of the observations we tried to make was that the family and the faith community working in tandem can create a kind of moral gravity that holds young people in orbit. Okay, I do want to be careful here though, because oftentimes social scientists reach conclusions, look at data and reach conclusions, which are sometimes affected by confirmation bias. It's what you expected is going to happen, and then it happens and you say, whoa, that's it. That's the secret sauce for a happy life. Religion, or parents, or good relationship with parents, something like that. I want to be careful. I don't want to call religion's not a vaccine, okay? And when we're dealing with these data, we're looking at probabilities of use or abuse of alcohol or things like that. And of course, there's always the threat of counterfactuals and misspecification problems with your model and so forth. If you want to know about counterfactuals, Lance is the guy to talk to. So anyway, and frankly, families of faith can produce problems and suffering for children and for others. And young people are most at risk, regardless of family affiliation or practices, because they can be fractured by the forces that I was studying. Okay, so the research should never really let me be comfortable. Sometimes it did, but very rarely. I always try to remind myself, you know what? There are so many issues that go into this that I shouldn't rest on it and think that I've, discovered something. Don't rest easy. And I think this is kind of like that pulley metaphor. That's at work again, pulling me up towards a greater understanding, a greater perspective as I looked over these things. So anyway, let me make it personal again. So I want to talk about hymns, okay? As I already have alluded to, I was not born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay? I came to the church in a way that I suspect many converts come to the faith, which is kind of meandering and sidestepping and that sort of thing. And then all at once, boom. Now the person you have to blame, poor students, is my wife Lynn, who is here today. She was the one who brought me to the threshold. Okay, she comes from back to Brigham Young is one of her family lines, and so comes from a long line of faithful LDS people. She's also extraordinary. I mean, extraordinary. I knew she'd make a face. But anyway, extraordinary love, curiosity, strength, and really a deep faith that she shows in the words she says and the things she does to help people. So anyway, I do want to give that shout out to her. And I already mentioned she's a direct descendant. I'm going to call her, she's not going to like this, my pearl of great price. Okay. Anyway, the most precious gift our Heavenly Father, our Heavenly Parents ever gave to me. So it's true. And we've been married for almost 38 years. And I'm still grateful every day that I found her, or she found me, or I don't know, something. We stumbled upon each other. So the story doesn't end there. We got married, but I did not join the church. Okay. Once again, her patience showed, because it was almost 10 years of thinking, reading, being the special project for the ward. You know, you always have those special projects for wards. Every ward we were at, I'm sure I was the special project. And it took a long time, but let me tell you sort of how this came about. One is I started hearing hymns, LDS hymns in my head, like all the time, okay? I would sing them, I'd wake up in the morning, they'd be in my head, and I'd start thinking about them. And so really it was music and the hymns that sort of first seemed to be, anyway, now that when I was trying to recall this, seemed to be the thing that kind of, I don't want to say precipitated this change in me, but certainly affected this change in me, pushed me a little bit, because they were up here a lot. And so I want to mention three in particular. I Need Thee Every Hour, Be Still My Soul, and In Humility Our Savior were three that I still remember, sort of taking residence up in my head, and me humming and so forth. And so it seemed to fit with this sacred music, seemed to fit with what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks called the music of the soul. It certainly had placed itself in my soul. And then the other thing that really had a very strong influence, so that's two things so far. Of course, Lynn, the hymns, and my oldest son. So he was turning 8, which you all know is the age when you get baptized. And it really got me thinking. So I like to think about it like it was like watching the meaning of covenant settle over him. And then I also remembered a recent conversation I'd had with the bishop of the ward we were attending in Virginia. And then I met some missionaries who touched my heart and soul. And I thought, it's time. Okay. So now I hadn't resolved every question I had about the church, about my faith, about the path I was taking. Not at all. I don't know if I have resolved. I don't think I have resolved all those things. Even this, however many years later, 27 years later or so. But I thought, covenants are really not conclusions. Okay, there's something different about that. They're commitments that keep asking these questions of us. So I was baptized in Sapporo, Japan in 1998. Now the water was just the beginning though. Sorry to say. But anyway, somehow I ended up here a year later, and that's a whole story in itself that I don't have time to tell you. So what I want to say to you as students, scholars, learners, is that a conversion of any kind does not necessarily simplify your intellectual life. It's not like you have all the answers in a spiritual way, and those give you the answers to the questions you have intellectually. Okay, but that's okay. All right, that's okay. It's okay for us to wrestle with these things. I'll mention Jonathan Sacks again. He has this wonderful essay, and it's on the tensions between reason and revelation, is how he talks about it. And he likens it to the encounter between Athens and Jerusalem, between the Greek gift of reason and the Hebrew gift of revelation. It's not a problem to be solved, but a creative fiction to be inhabited. Okay. friction. I said fiction, that was bad. Don't listen to me when I say that. Friction, creative friction. Okay. He said, faith does not answer all of reason's questions. Okay? It asks different questions usually. All right? Sometimes they're better. They're better ones to ask. But it was this kind of friction, and I'll characterize it like, the data in one hand and the covenant in the other, that made me, I think, a better scholar. Okay? I think I was more open to thinking about things a little bit more expansively in my own scholarship. Not saying that we can always put those down into words that a journal or whatever is going to accept, but a more holistic view of the things I was interested in. Because one of the things I think I was sensitive to is it's not just the numbers, right? It's the fact that what are their meaning for the souls that they represent, for the people, the individuals they represent, the groups they represent, and so forth. It's never enough for us to stop with just interpreting a regression coefficient and not, at least once again, the journals may not let you do this, but in your own mind, in your own notes, whatever, thinking about what this means for people, thinking about their situations and what they're going through. So anyway, there's a passage in Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, a book I've sort of embraced all because of Curtis Child, because he talks about the beautiful prose that she writes. Beautiful, would you say beautiful and complicated? Beautiful and complicated. But anyway, the story is about an aging congregationalist minister named John Ames. And in one portion, he's talking to a grandson, and he reflects on the strangeness of existence itself. And he said the following: "This is an interesting planet." Writing to his young son. "This is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it." And once again, as I've thought about the research I do, the data sets, the kinds of studies I do, I oftentimes come back to that and think about it once again. It's not all about the variables and the regression coefficients and that sort of thing. It's about those human lives. Human people gave us that information, right? And so it's best if we consider that, there are questions that they have and that they're helping us answer about family, faith, adversity, habits, hopes, and all sorts of things. So it's worth paying more attention to it. I'll use an awkward phrase. I know my colleagues won't like this, but I'm going to call it methodological love. And what do we do to those we love? We pay attention to them, right? And Marilyn Robinson says in other writings, she talks about attention being the beginning of devotion, which I think is also an interesting idea. Not only are we paying attention to the people who are generously offering their time to answer our oftentimes silly and complicated questions, but we might want to think about, that's a devotion in itself. So anyway, so I kept thinking about, the family as sort of a source of both repair and damage. And so what it seems to be, what the research is pretty clear about, and this is one of those things where I always, you do the research and then you realize, wow, everybody knows that. But it's still nice to have some confirmation, some evidence of that. And so, what we found is when parents are present, in particular when they're genuinely present, authoritative without being authoritarian, religious without being coercive, which is a big thing in sociology of religion, children are more resilient, okay? And when we think about it in this context, in our context, and kind of, at Latter-day Saint belief, we can think about it as, we can think about the eternal nature of family and realize we're not saved alone. We're all part of these family units and that grow and grow. And, if you do your family history, like my wife keeps trying to get me to do, you see that tree just branching out and branching out. So Now, oftentimes in sociology, when we talk about faith communities, we might use a term like social capital, okay? That's a common term for talking about extended networks of support or non-support structure for that matter. Theologians might call this fellowship, okay? And the more fellowship we can give young people, the more protected they can be. Once again, we're not saved alone. So I wrote a paper, I don't know, 3 years ago or something. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to look at, because I mentioned earlier, there's that transition point that researchers don't really understand very well. And that transition is between use of substances and problems using substances. And if you look at the, there's several studies of it, lots of them done, but it tends to be some neuroscientists are studying that sort of thing, and they're finding certain risk factors in the brain and so forth that do that. But I was interested, are there social factors also that can either lead to a greater probability of making that transition or lower the probability? And so I thought, hey, I like to look at religion. I thought I'd look at religion as well as family issues. And I thought, what happens if we look at a variable like parental warmth, okay? And this is from the young person's perspective, how warm they think their parents are. And then also their religiosity, how are they involved in religious communities? Are they actively involved and so forth? And what I found was that the two of them seem to combine pretty well to minimize, even among those who are already using, to minimize the risk that they're going to make the young people are going to make that transition from use to abuse or use to problem use. So I looked at that and I thought, let me look at my own life, okay? This is something I don't know what my colleagues think, but I think oftentimes we don't turn the research in on ourselves and say, well, have I done the right thing to help people that I realized from my research helps people? So I did. I turned it on myself and I thought, with my children, my family, have I done enough? Have I been present enough? Lynn would say no. But anyway, she said I was always taking classes and going to school, so I wasn't around. Anyway, but had I transmitted something to my family, my children, that was worth receiving for them? And I like to think the answer is yes. But it's complicated because we're not perfect. And I know I did things imperfectly, okay? Probably more imperfect, if I can say it like that, more imperfectly than Lynn ever did. So anyway. But this imperfection, it's an honest answer, but it also emphasizes all of our imperfections, that we're all imperfect. And so where do we go with our imperfections? How do we overcome those imperfections? Through the atonement of Jesus Christ, okay? And it made me think of the atonement not as some abstract theological idea, but sort of as a functional proposition, something that we can use in our lives, which I know we've heard from a lot of pulpits, how could you use the atonement in your life? Because this infinite atonement, it makes the imperfect parent, the wounded child, the struggling researcher, it makes all of this, it makes us worth redeeming, whatever our role. And it's a grace that holds what the data cannot hold. Okay, so sorry if I'm getting too metaphysical here, but that's the way it goes. All right, so let me return to the pulley idea again. See if I've caught up. Oh, that was Marilyn Robinson. Okay, let me return to that pulley idea. So I talked about the restlessness that he describes and the restlessness that, as I look back, I felt. But this restlessness is sort of that God, according to his poetry, God withholding a gift from us, right? But for a purpose. And I don't think that's punitive. I don't think that's him Heavenly Father acting punitive. I think it's a form of love, okay? Which is probably obvious because of course he loves us, but unconditionally. But it's also what keeps us reaching, okay? It's one of the things that makes us human, makes us want to better ourselves, better others, help others, and so forth. And that reaching is really possible because of the roots that we put down. So let me talk about my roots at BYU, okay? I've been here 27 years, or almost 27 years, and in our restless country, that can seem like a long time to be at any one place. Although I'm not unique at BYU. I know a lot of people stay here for a long time. But Wendell Berry wrote, he said, "And we pray not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye, clear, what we need is here." And I think oftentimes I've been guilty of thinking that what I need or what I want is elsewhere. And I have to remind myself, no, what I need is here. My wife is here, my family's here, I have friends here. I have a good position at BYU where I'm treated really well and the students are so wonderful. Okay, so BYU has been kind of that place for me. I have colleagues who challenge me in all sorts of different ways, teach me all sorts of things, and have helped me throughout the years so much. You students, you just break me open, break open my mind and heart with your goodness and your positive attitudes and your desire to learn, and even sometimes stay awake in my classes. So I appreciate that. So, but I see this as, this has been a good place. This is a good community for not just a social scientist, but a social scientist who's also a person of faith, where that's just not seen as kind of an eccentricity, but it's cherished. You're embraced in this community for that. So I have appreciated that. So some of you may know that this disciple scholar idea, one of the places that sort of generated it was Neil A. Maxwell. And he says, way too much I'm not going to read much of that, but I won't read it. But he said, for instance, that for a disciple of Jesus Christ, academic scholarship is a form of worship and another dimension of consecration. And if I'm interpreting that correctly, which if I'm not, I like the way I interpret it anyway, what I want to leave with you is encouragement, okay? The tensions, just getting back to that, the tensions we're going to feel between our intellectual lives and our spiritual lives, they're going to be real on occasion. And that's okay. It's creative. It's that creative tension that we can have. And it might at times unsettle your faith. It might at times make you think the data are more complicated and you're just not getting it. You're just not getting what's really in there because you know that God would never let this happen, or, his plan is not designed to do this or that, but rather, no, I know how it's going to happen. We don't necessarily know, but we can embrace that, learn from it, think about it, dive deeper into things that we never thought we needed to do. Jonathan Sacks, once again, he said, reason and revelation are not enemies. They are a dialogue that is long and sometimes difficult, but brings forth a fertile conversation about what it means to be human and what it means to be accountable to something larger than ourselves, which I think is just a beautiful sentiment. So I'm not going to read this whole one. I'm just going to give you a little flavor. This is from Mary Oliver, The Summer Day, and I just wanted to highlight this one part. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I have had not really a wild life, but I consider it precious. But I've spent my time in this wild and precious life as a father, as a husband, as a researcher, trying to assess things that protect people, that protect children, that protect adolescents, protect young adults. Things like religiousness, family warmth, social connection, moral communities. And really what I found is that, if you want to put it in a nutshell, is what really protects us is love, okay? The love we have for others and the love that others have for us. And that's such an important idea. And once again, it oftentimes seems obvious, but is it? I mean, is it really the way we live our day-to-day lives? Or just sometimes we go home crabby and, yell at our children, and they think, oh, Bob, I don't think Dad loves me anymore because, that sort of thing. So anyway, I think the love that I hope we're showing, and I'm going to do one of those things you always hear from the pulpit. I'm much worse at this than any of you. I don't know if I am, but anyway, the kind of love characterized by selflessness, sacrifice, compassion, and unconditional care for others. That's the kind of life talking about. Okay, let me talk about my family some more and see if I can embarrass Lynn. The family is kind of where I started on this faith journey, and it's kind of where I'm going, and that's not going to change. And so, let me talk a little bit about Lynn, who she brought me to the cusp of faith. And even if I didn't know what I was looking for, she was very patient. She walked with me through my trials, through my questions, through my doubts, and so forth. She's been here in me throughout my career. And she has that that sort of pioneer spirit of keep going, keep going, keep working. And I was lucky for that, because with me, she could have given up, and she kept, it was a long time, seemed like a long time. Anyway, once again, my pearl of great price. So anyway, our 4 sons, Brian, Christopher, Brandon, and Curtis, who grew up in a household where their dad may have expressed doubts too often, or may have been, asked questions that were a little bit uncomfortable. But fortunately, Lynn was there to answer them. And we now have 7 grandsons, and there's nothing like grandsons. Not only do you get to return them to their parents after you're done with them, but they also, just watching them, their curiosity, their openness, their excitement about things in nature and elsewhere is just beautiful. It's something that I kind of forgot about from my own childhood and from my children's childhood, about that magic that they bring. So anyway, once again, I want to thank my colleagues and students for what they've brought into my life as we've thought about ideas, as we've wrestled with ideas, and so forth. So anyway, and I still think about this. If you feel like you're wavering in your faith at all, or you're troubled by things that are going on, find somebody who you admire and trust, and a faithful person somebody you consider particularly faithful, but also whatever other qualities you're looking for, kindness, love, whatever it may be. And what they're probably going to tell you is, well, come with me and you'll see. It's not just, you're not alone, Come with me and you'll see. You'll see this path is a particularly valuable way to go in your life. Okay. So, and I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm retiring, and I don't know kind of where I'm going to be going or where we're going to be going, but I'm kind of excited about it. I'm nervous, anxious, but I'm also excited about it, because who knows where we're going to end up or what we're going to be doing. I think it'll be fun. Lynn's really fun to travel with, so we have places to go. And so, that curiosity is something that I look forward to, the curiosity of getting back to being curious like a little child, and learning new things and so forth. And and to remember that pulley is always going to be there, pulling me up and trying to make my life better. So let me close with a poem. This is the full poem by Wendell Berry. If you don't know who Wendell Berry is, he's a wonderful writer and poet who farms on a small farm in Kentucky and writes beautiful prose and beautiful poems. And this one's called The Wild Geese. And so I want to read it because it offers what I consider kind of an invitation to the way that we might live a life that's kind of at the intersection of scholarship and discipleship. So let me just read that to you real quickly. Sorry, I took more time than I wanted to. Okay. Horseback on Sunday morning, harvest over, we taste persimmon and wild grape, sharp, sweet. sorry. Oh, I forgot this one. Okay. Sorry, let me let you look at that and go, aw, for a second. I forgot all about this one. Anyway, to show our children and grandchildren, my mom, our adopted son. Anyway, my son's adopted, he's a caretaker for a couple of girls. Anyway, so yeah, so this is the Hoffmann family, and you see the two at the bottom are, it shows this picture of our latest grandchildren too. So anyway, I've come a long way from that little, I don't know if you saw it before, that little Catholic boy in his grandfather's arms to this, and unfortunately this, that you're looking at now. So anyway, okay, so let me read this to you. Horseback on Sunday morning, harvest over, we taste persimmon and wild grape, sharp sweet of summer's end. In time's maze over fall fields, we name names that went west from here, names that rest on graves. We open a persimmon seed to find the tree that stands in promise, pale and in seed's marrow. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in lover sleep, holds them to their way, clear in the ancient faith. What we need is here. And we pray not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I leave these words with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.